Hi, this is Street Life and I'm Natasha, back at it with a review and discussion of LA Confidential. I watch movies. I like current movies, but I also watch old movies. Sometimes on a Sunday, if I don't have much of anything else to do, I'll spend the day on and off watching Turner Classic Movies. Black and white films don't bother me as long as it's a good film. I'm willing to check it out. Although LA Confidential is a movie that came out in the 90s, it kind of gives you that sense of, and it's in color, but it gives you that sense of like those old film noir type movies. Those films from like the 1940s and 1950s with like the private investigators. It brings to mind your like Humphrey Bogarts. Now, granted, with censorship codes and things like that, it wouldn't have been possible to make a movie like this back then. But I could see this cleaned up having been a Humphrey Bogart movie. The movie is supposed to be taking place in like 1950s LA, where you have like back in the movie studio days, when there weren't really like freelance actors, where you would pretty much, actors and actresses were signed to contracts with studios. And it gives you a sense of the time where the film studios very much so control the city, or at least had an outsized role in the city. They have close ties to the police department, they have close ties to the underworld, and all of these different circles and whatnot intersect with each other at the center of this story. So you have three police officers. Russell Crowe plays Bud, Guy Pearce is Exley, and Kevin Spacey is Jack. And initially, they kind of get into it at a jail where actually they carry out some police brutality on inmates. And we get a peek into the different characters as far as how they handle things. Exley, his father was a police officer and he's incredibly ambitious, but like brown-noser and problematic in that he's willing to do just about anything to get ahead. His father was a big name, a big-time police officer in his day, and he's trying to break out of his father's shadow. So he's willing to go above and beyond to make a name for himself. And so with that, he kind of runs afoul of some of the other police officers. He shows himself as being willing to snitch on fellow officers, which, in light of modern events, that's kind of what you want, right? Like where you have police officers that are doing wrong, you do want other police officers to speak up and to say something, right? But within the context of the film, it's regarded as being like a terrible thing. He's regarded as being untrustworthy. Now, granted, within the context of the film, because it's not really a matter of him trying to do right. It's more so a matter of him using this as like another step up the ladder, right? It's more about his ambition. It comes from a place of selfishness rather than a place of him trying to do the right thing. You then have Bud, where his backstory is a little bit different. He comes from a very dysfunctional background where his father was an abuser and pretty much beat his mother to death. And so, he witnessed this, and as an adult man now, he's very angry, very violent man, trying to do the right thing, but often does so in the wrong way. It's like, he might be at the tail end of things, he might be well-intentioned, but the way he goes about doing things is very unscrupulous. So here you have these two characters that are kind of reversals of each other. They're reflections of each other. And at the center of this story is this massacre that takes place at a local restaurant, whereas the story starts off, there's a police investigation that leads to the arrest of a mobster within the city. This guy is kind of like the head honcho within the city. And so with him being out in the street and actively present, there's criminal activity taking place, yes, but he has the power and authority to kind of keep some of the worst elements of the criminal underworld in check. And so with him out in the street, things function. There's criminal activity going on, but there's limits to the amount of violence, to how far things are allowed to go. He has the power and authority to keep some of the players in line, but with his arrest and him being taken off the street, it creates a power vacuum, which is something that you see in other cases as well, right? Both in fiction and in reality. You see this happen sometimes in locations where you might have like an organized criminal enterprise, someone at the top gets arrested. Like the police will often try to arrest lower level dealers, lower level players, but really they want that big fish where it's like, theoretically, if you take that person out of play, the hope is that the organization is going to collapse, which sometimes it does, because the people under are really banded together under the leadership of this person that's strong enough, that has the connections or the individual power to kind of keep everyone in line and keep the organization running smoothly. But what often happens is that in removing that person from power, it creates a power vacuum where now you have all of these smaller players who are now jockeying for position. They're now battling out to take that person's spot. And whereas this one person at the top was able to show their might, they might have faced threats every now and then and whatnot, but they were pretty much able to run the operation and keep everyone else in line. With that person removed, it's like you now have fights over territory, right? As people try to grab up territory or fight for power, right? Like they're trying to fight for the throne or for the crown. And so with this guy being taken out of play, the other players, the other lower level people, are now looking at this as an opportunity for them to grab, if not market share, then to put themselves into his position. And so as a result of this, once he goes off to jail, there's now all of this violence. His henchmen, a number of people that worked under him, a number of them end up being murdered. And so you have people fighting to take control of the streets. And, they try to remove anyone that might pose a threat to them being able to obtain and maintain power. In this early part of the movie, when this guy goes to jail, there's shootouts and murders and whatnot. And at the center of the story is this one particular massacre where several people are murdered at a restaurant. It seems like a seemingly senseless act of violence, but these 3 police officers kind of get pulled into investigating to figure out what's at play here. This takes place in LA, where with there being some industry people in attendance who were murdered, or at least somewhat connected to the people that are murdered. Like there's an actress who, within the context of the movie, remembering this is like the 40s, 50s, you have like the official Hollywood industry, the players within that. So it's like you have the leading actresses of the day where, like Yolanda Turner's and these kinds of people. You have this guy who, for all intents and purposes, he's like taking advantage of the film industry to run a prostitution ring, making adult films where he gets like these lookalike actresses based on big actresses of the day. And people pretend like they were prim and proper back then. But a large part of the appeal of these women back then, and even men as well, is people fantasizing about them. And here it is that you have this man who finds these lookalikes, either because they just naturally look like these celebrities, or in some cases through plastic surgery. He takes these women who arrive in town hoping to become actresses and makes it as such where they're made up to look like these actual film actresses. And with that, they then appear in adult films. Some of them engage in acts of prostitution. And so there's like official Hollywood, and then there's this unofficial seedy underworld where you have like this underground sex industry. And within the massacre, you have like one of these actresses who ends up being killed. And with that, the police try to investigate what caused this incident or what's really going on here. And what they realize is that there's industry people involved. The police are involved. These worlds are really interconnected. They're leading investigations across like multiple parts of the city, right? The out in the open stuff, as well as like this alternative seedy underworld. And it's like they're dealing with what's on the surface, but there's also this stuff. There's the stuff out in the open, but then there's also this stuff that's more covert and hidden. And at play here, you have it where it seems like the movie really covers this investigation. You have these 3 police officers digging into what really went on. And there's like other events that take place, people that are, playing where there's what's out in the open and then there's what's really going on behind the scenes, and trying to figure out like what really happened here. Everything isn't as it seems. And I don't want to give away too much of the story, but it's an older movie at this point in time, but there's like some twists and turns and double crosses where I think it's more enjoyable your first time around to see these things unfolding without knowing in advance what happened. Right? I don't want to spoil it for you in the event that you haven't seen the movie, but the story is such that you can watch it multiple times, even after watching the movie through the first time and knowing what really happened, who did what. but you can watch it again and enjoy it just as much. You have some really great performances here. There's quite a few characters, and it can be a little bit much to keep up with, but there's an interesting story at play. I love police procedurals, so this is just my kind of film. And combine that with a pretty interesting story, some, a little bit of gossip about the film industry. It made it a really good movie for me. It checked a lot of boxes for me. And if you would enjoy anything along those lines, I think you'd enjoy this as well. And with that, I highly recommend LA Confidential. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.